appreciate her expertise. And I'm sorry, but before I finish the bio on that, I want to let you know that this will be recorded, okay? And you'll be able to have, if you want to, for our presenters and everything, they'll also be able, the recording will be posted later on the Building Bridges Community Experience YouTube channel. So I just want to let you know that this will be recorded, okay? Now with Dr. Brooke also, her expertise has contributed to the broader understanding of what reentry is and career pathways. Mary Cox, she's a remarkable individual who embodies the spirit of resilience and transformation. Mary's path has marked her pursuit in education, a powerful tool that she's chosen to weld on her journey to self-sufficiency. And Mary Cox will share her experiences and challenges and triumphs as a justice-impacted citizen as well. So without further ado, I will be kind of the moderator, if you will. So please put all your questions in the chat and we'll do our best to adhere to them for some Q&A at the end of the presentations. Thank you so much. Dr. Brooke, I'll pass it to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ernest. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us today. Just give me a moment, please, while I share our screen. All right. Is everybody able to see the PowerPoint? Perfect. Wonderful. Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you again all for joining us today. And yes, special thanks to Mary too for being my co-facilitator here today. Today's presentation, Empowering Justice Impacted Citizens for Successful Job Interviews. We're excited to share with you what we have learned and some of the work that we're doing out here in Clark County to help our clients. So some of our learning goals for today, to help understand the unique challenges justice-impacted individuals face seeking employment. We're going to gain some insight into teaching practical communication techniques and provide some guidance in how to help justice-impacted folks articulate their post-incarceration journey as a story of resilience, determination, and positive transformation. Because as we'll see, that really is an important part of having a successful job interview. Now, I would like to say that most of our work here in Clark County, we're working with clients one-on-one. So when we're helping them get prepared for interviews, it tends to be a one-on-one session. So if you are in a county or a community that has like a 4-week reentry program where folks are able to, to have a class on resume building and a class on interview skills. Those are great opportunities to connect your clients with. And if you already have that, I'm not sure how many of these skills will be new to you. But if you're working one-on-one with clients, I'm really hopeful that some of the tips and tools that we have found and that we use will help you find success with your clients. So let's start with a little bit of just the America's reentry crisis. There are 70 million people in the US that have a criminal record. That's about 1 in 3 people, right? 1/3, which tells us that, having a history of incarceration isn't necessarily as common as people think that it is. We know that every week around 10,000 individuals are released from state and federal prison, and about 1/3 of these folks never find suitable employment. And so what does that mean for them? Well, it means that they end up surviving by a combination of family and partner support, using food assistance and public benefits, and then engaging in some types of illicit activities or under the table work. And many of these folks end up becoming homeless as well. Nationally, we know that almost 40% of incarcerated individuals return within 3 years. So we know that in finding employment success can be a helpful step in reducing that recidivism. So justice-involved citizens that find stable work are less likely to commit new offenses and return to prison. And we know, and this is partially because employment provides structure and responsibility. It helps build self-reliance, and again, helps reduce that recidivism and desistance. If you're not familiar with that word desistance means likelihood to engage in criminal activity again. So oftentimes we spend a lot of time focusing on recidivism, which is actually going back into the system, but there's a difference between desistance and recidivism. And so we also like to make sure we're focusing on desistance as well. All right, so let's jump in and talk about some of the barriers to employment that we see that our clients face and other justice impacted folks are facing. There tends to be a lot of internal barriers and external barriers. So internal barriers might be job readiness, lack of education, lack of certain skills to help them be prepared for the workforce. So if you have the opportunity, sorry, if you're hearing all that dinging, those are different people coming into us a little bit late. So that's why we're hearing that dinging in the background. So if you find your folks need some job readiness training or you're not sure, we would definitely recommend doing a job readiness assessment with them and then getting connected to those resources. A lot of jobs and family service centers across the state of Ohio within each county have job readiness programs they can help connect folks to if they need that additional training. Other internal barriers include criminal thinking. So having attitudes that make somebody more likely to engage in a criminal activity, that can be an internal barrier to success. This is something that I've seen with some of our clients before. I've had clients tell me, well, if I don't make this much, then I'm going to go back and do this illegal activity because I can make this much money doing it. That's a great example of an internal barrier, that's going to hurt them or cause them challenges finding that success in employment. Having a lack of pro-social network, so not knowing people who've been successful, not having connections to folks who've had career success can be a challenge, as well as self-identity. Sometimes folks don't see themselves as having like a traditional job or having that traditional 9 to 5. And that can be a challenge, that it requires then having a conversation with that client about self-identity and how they see themselves and how they would like to see themselves in the future. Other internal barriers that we see are mental and physical health barriers and substance abuse barriers. These are really important things that the client needs to be working on in some way, oftentimes before they can have employment success. When we see this with our clients, especially if they're physical or mental health barriers, we might connect them with another community partner that specializes in helping people with employment around physical and mental health barriers. So for example, Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities works in this area as well. And sometimes they can be a little bit more equipped to support some of our clients. So we try to make those connections and provide those warm handoffs when appropriate. Family support and professional contacts, well, I should say lack of family support or lack of professional contacts, those can also be some barriers to employment. And the last one in those internal barriers is defensive individualism. And this might be something you've seen before with some of your clients in the past as well. So this is an idea that they need to do it on their own, and that they don't want to ask for help from other folks. I definitely see this with some of our older clients, especially clients that were successful before incarceration. When they get out of incarceration, they often don't want to ask for that help because they were self-sufficient beforehand. So we have to work with them and talk to them about it being okay for them to ask for help. There's also external barriers to employment, and I think these are important things to mention as well. So we already know about the discrimination that folks experience if they're justice impacted while looking for work. And we also know that many of the folks who are justice impacted, there's a high percentage of people of color within that group as well. So for some of our clients, they have this kind of compounded discrimination, right? Discrimination from being justice impacted as well as racial discrimination. So these are important things to be aware of because these are external barriers. Justice impacted folks receive a lot of stigma from the community, and this can include from employers themselves. So that can be an external barrier. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple minutes too. Housing and transportation, if folks don't have stable housing or the transportation to get them to work, that can be a major barrier. Extreme poverty, and then blanket bans blocking people from certain careers, that can be a challenge as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that last one as well when we talk about CQEs in a few minutes. So let's take a look now at employer willingness. So this was a study from 2014, and it asked employers about their willingness to consider different types of applicants applicants. And one of the things I hope you can pull from this table is the very last column where it says definitely not accept. Nearly 40% of the employers said that they would definitely not accept somebody with a criminal record. So again, this shows a lot that employers' attitudes around folks with a criminal record can be an external barrier, right? So our clients need to be aware of this, and they need to think about what things they can do to help alleviate that employer's fears. So where do employers' fears come from? I think that's an important part of the story too. So it's important to note that employers' perceptions are shaped by personal experience and media reporting. So things that they see in the news, things that they see in fictional television, those all influence people's understandings of justice impacted folks, right? Um, Employers will often adopt a probing interview approach when considering hiring justice-involved citizens. And this is something we do like to warn our clients about before they go into that job interview. Because if the employer starts to take this approach, we find that it can make people feel really nervous and anxious. So, one aspect of trauma-informed care is to make sure we're giving people all the information up front that we can. So letting our clients know that, an employer might do this, right? They might adopt that probing interview approach, and to try not to be anxious about it, and then to prepare them for that interview in case they take that approach. So what are some of the fears that employers have noted? Well, we've combed through a bunch of the research, and what we find is that employers have 6 main fears that they tend to talk about with hiring justice impacted folks. First, they worry that they'll need help integrating into society, and they don't want to provide that help in the workplace. They worry that they're not work ready already. They worry that they lack soft skills or lack trustworthiness, that they have a high risk cost, or they worry a fear of violence. And again, that comes back to our very first point about how employers' perceptions can be shaped by media reporting as well. So understanding employers' fears are really important. And in fact, we actually spend some time with our clients and talk to them about the employers' fears. We find that this is really a successful technique, because instead of us just telling them, having our clients kind of step into the shoes of the employer and think about it from the employer situation helps them think more about how they want to present themselves to impress that employer. So we're going to come back to some of these employer fears in a few minutes, because we're going to talk about the reentry pitch and how you can use that moment to address some of these employer fears. But let's talk about some of the positive, because there's some data out there as well looking at why employers have hired justice-involved citizens. And I think these things are important too. And if you can share these with your clients, that can help them get some more confidence too, and help aid them during that job interview process. So one of the top reasons listed is that that candidate matched the job requirements. So that's a pretty easy one, right? If we're working with clients to help, help them cash in on this reason, we want to make sure that their resume matches the job requirements listed. And if they're putting together a cover letter, that their skills are matching those job requirements. That way, that gives them a step up. Employers also note that they hire folks because of their interview skills. So one of those fears was that folks didn't have soft skills, right? Or lack trustworthiness. Well, strong interviewing can help alleviate some of those fears. If you're a strong communicator during that interview, that can help make the employer feel a higher sense of safety. Affiliation with another employee can play a role as well. So one thing that we do with our clients is we ask them about their personal network. Oftentimes, justice-involved citizens will know other justice-involved citizens. So, ask them who they know that is doing well and is being successful. We want to make sure they're staying within their pro-social networks. And, see if there's job opportunities within those fields, and whether or not that friend can be a reference or a resource for them when applying to that position. Employers will note that if they have a belief that a person has changed, that can influence their hiring decision. And we'll give some examples of how to, again, build that narrative so the employer can see those positive transformations. Some employers will look at that last criminal conviction and examine it for themselves. Employers also note that the transparency and sincerity when disclosing a conviction can play a large role. We'll get into that here again in a couple minutes. And then prior interactions with employees with criminal history. So their past experiences are going to play a role as well. So when we're working with clients, we want to spend some time with them early on talking about their career pathway. We find that empowering justice involves citizens to set and work towards employment goals instead of taking any job, helps increase their likelihood of long-term employment and assistance. Now, this is a challenge. Sometimes we are working with clients and their probation officer or their parole officer says, you need to get a job right away. And in those instances, you maybe don't have as much time to really think through this whole career pathway. And in those cases, what we do is we often try to help our client get that first job and then continue to engage with them in this conversation about their career pathway. So what is the career pathway? The career pathway is the steps it takes to get to that ideal job, that ideal career. You know, well, let's just look at the graphic, sorry. So that first step in that career pathway might be to engage in training, to earn some credentials as an initial step on that career path. Then they might try to become employed in an entry-level job in that occupation, continuing to re-engage in training and building those skills, and then finally getting promoted in that current job or advance in that career within that industry. Sometimes we work with clients and, you know, they want to be at that very top level. They don't necessarily realize that this is actually a pathway. You have to build those skills in order to get that top position, right? And this isn't true. This isn't only for justice impacted folks. And we actually like to spend some time talking to them about this, right? This career pathway, this is a career pathway for everybody. I've had to follow this career pathway. I'm sure all of you have had to follow this career pathway. If you work in higher education, you're teaching about this career pathway. You know, folks come out of college and they don't necessarily get that top job that they want. They still often have to take a lower position, gain that training, and work their way up. So this isn't necessarily a punishment for justice impacted people. This is how we grow in our career. So helping them be aware of that can help them be more passionate and motivated on this journey. Now, to share a little bit more about career pathways and her individual career pathway, I'm going to hand it over to Mary. Mary has been pursuing her career pathway for a while here, and she's pursuing a peer support certificate as well. So I'm going to let her talk a little bit about her experience.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Once again, my name is Mary Cox, and I will be speaking. Can everybody hear me? Can everybody hear me now?
Yes, we hear you, Mary.
Okay. Whew. Technology, you guys, it's terrible sometimes. But good morning, everyone. So I'll talk to you today about the CQE process. But before I do so, I want you all to know that honestly, I had no idea, no knowledge whatsoever of what a CQE was when I was deciding to map out my career path and during my training. But while I was in training, I learned that I had what was considered as a disqualifying charge. That meant that even when I was done with training, I would not qualify for the field I chose to go in. I know that it was devastating. It was a total disappointment. So I thought all hopes were lost. So I went to my instructor and I spoke with them and I explained to them what was going on with my background. Long and behold, my instructor told me about the CQE process, the qualifying for the certificate of qualifying for employment. So once I was told about that, I realized that all hopes weren't lost. And then I went, moving forward, I had to go look up the CQE. And I went to the website at the DRC CQE website. Once I went there, I had to create an account. After I created my account, I had to fill out for the petition for the CQE. Now, the form itself seemed a bit challenging. There were questions that required me to really think into the career path and why the CQE will be beneficial for me. And as far as any individual, they have to think about why the CQE will be beneficial for them and be able to prove why you should be considered for the CQE. I was scared and very nervous, believing that I would never be considered. So I'll give a little advice right now. Be honest and open and continue to be an upright citizen and finish filling out the CQE. You will also need to be able to answer the questions, but also provide personal reference from some. And for some people, that might be a bit challenging within itself due to not having a big support system. But don't give up. Think about it now, who could be a positive reference and who not. And then you also will have to put down some employment history, if you have employment history to put down. The CQE was like 12 pages long. I know. No, don't freak out. I understand 12 pages. Wow. You might not have that much information to put on the forms, but that's okay. Now, after finish filling out the CQE, remember to hit the submit button. I made that mistake. I filled out the whole entire CQE and like 2 weeks went past and I didn't get any information. And that was because I didn't hit the submit button. Go figure. So make sure you hit the submit button after you fill out the CQE. And find somewhere safe to put your login information and passwords, because you're going to need that again once your CQE is approved. You have to print that approved CQE out. The next step will go to your county office. You have to file the approved CQE. You have to file that in your county's clerk's office. Now, everyone's county clerk's office is different. The fees, you have a fee to pay to file the petition, and that's based upon your clerk's office. So you'll have to ask your clerk's office how much the filing fee is. So do that ahead of time, and so you can be prepared. Now, since we've done step 1, we've done step 2, we're up to step 3, where you've already filed your CQE, and now you have a court hearing to go to. If you're like me or been in a situation like me, the thought of going to a court hearing, I mean, it was just like, oh my God, it was so scary. Because it was like I was going to trial for my life. But in hindsight, I was going to trial for my life, but in a positive aspect. You know, I had to be able to, I needed to be able to receive the CQE in order to continue further in my education. Long and behold, my first court hearing, I was denied by the judge. I was off parole for 12 days, had only been out of prison for 10 months, and I was totally disappointed and crushed when the judge denied me. I stayed the course, I finished my training, I re-enrolled in school to further my education to just obtain a degree versus just a certificate in my career field. I shortly met Brooke Wagner, and I decided to refile my CQE this time. But when I refiled it and re-got my hearing, this time the judge granted it to me. And at the same time, he praised me for coming back and proving I had turned away from my criminal lifestyle. And that was just so encouraging to me. So now that I have my CQE, I can take my final steps for submitting everything, including the approved CQE, to the licensing board of my career choice for my final exam to be officially state certified, and then start applying for my work in my career field. What I can tell you to tell any individual who's starting this process is don't give up. It is possible. That's why the CQE is out there for individuals that's just as impacted, such as myself. And just for them to do their due diligence with the steps of the CQE process. And remember that it can happen for them in the end. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, so we're so proud of Mary. And on the slide, you can even see we put in a copy of her CQE that she just received in August of this year. So we're just so proud of Mary for all of her hard work that she has done. Thank you so much for talking about the CQE and how that was one of the steps within your career pathway. So moving forward, we're going to talk a little bit more about the interview itself. So a couple things that we like to make sure we're working with our clients on before the interview is first of all, we like to talk to them about realism. You know, we want them to be realistic. We want them to understand that, you know, it might not be easy, but as long as they're persistent and, you know, take the steps that they're supposed to take, that they can find success. But realism really is important. Sometimes we have clients that have very unrealistic expectations. I had a client once say they had zero work history and they wanted to make $25 to $30 an hour. That was not very realistic, but it gave me an opportunity to talk about the career path and say, all right, well, that's your goal. That's this top step. So let's talk about where we need to begin to get there, right? So presenting that realism to them. Persistence, again, persistence is really important. And research actually shows that folks who have self-starting attitude, who are, you know, motivated to look for work are a lot more successful looking for work, which probably makes a lot of sense, right? If you're motivated to look for it, you're more likely to find it. One of the other things that we really want to talk to folks about when we're starting the process is what are their technology barriers? You know, do they have access to a computer? I'll talk to a lot of folks and they'll do all their applications from their phone. And while, you know, it's great to have this little mini computer in your pocket, it's really not ideal for applications. You can make small mistakes in there, grammar errors, spelling errors, because that print is just so small. So you're not necessarily doing the best presentation of self to employers when you're working from your phone. So helping them access an actual computer, whether that means going to the library, helping them, like first, sometimes it's just informing them that they can go to the library to use that computer. Or a lot of counties have within their OMJ center, computer labs, which can be another great place for them to go and access a computer for employment purposes. We also talk to them about their voicemail, making sure they set up a professional voicemail where they say their name. Honestly, I get a lot of resistance from clients for this, but I've also talked to employers who say that if they call and they get a voicemail and there's nothing on it, they won't leave a message because they don't know who they're talking to. So making sure that you set up that voicemail is really important, as is having an appropriate email address. Sometimes we do have to work with folks and help them set up a new email address, one that employers will find appropriate. And of course, helping them build that resume. Additionally, with starting the process, sometimes folks have questions about, well, how can people find jobs? Well, I got a couple different leads up here for you. First, you can try looking at felon-friendly employer lists. So a lot of reentry departments put together kind of second chance employer lists. I know our department does that every month. We have a second chance employer list that we can help folks get connected to employers from. And if your community doesn't have a second chance employer list, I suggest checking out Honest Jobs, honestjobs.com. They have second chance employers, and they create a list by county across for the state of Ohio. And something new that they've started doing is they've started putting in little tags to show how many folks have been hired by this employer. So I just found that to be very promising. Reaching out to prior employers. So sometimes we have clients who had very successful jobs before incarceration, and that boss, you know, they had a really good relationship with them. So reaching out to those prior employers can be helpful. A lot of communities have temp agencies. So working with temp agencies can be a possibility. Using your personal network is really helpful. And of course, relying on your community resources like your Ohio Means Job Center. Just as a general note, when we're working with clients, we try to remind them that if an application asks about their criminal history, history to make sure that they check yes, and they will discuss it during their interview. It's very important that they don't ever check no, because if you lie on that application, then you won't be hired. And if you lie on that application and they find out later on, you could be fired at a later date. So we just want to make sure that we're always being honest from the very beginning. We do like to work with our clients a little bit to help them prepare for the interview. And again, how much preparation we help provide them is really dependent upon our client. So if we have a client that we know already has good communication, strong communication skills, is already work ready, we might not review all of this information with them. But when we have clients that haven't had a lot of success in work, these are certain points that we want to discuss with them. First, looking one's best. And what does that mean? And keeping in mind that how we individually perceive ourselves as looking our best might be different than how the employer perceives looking one's best. So again, this is that opportunity to help our clients, see the job interview from that employer's perspective. So sometimes we'll have clients who will wear t-shirts with like some type of graphic image on it, and they'll think this is a nice shirt, but we have to talk to them. A graphic image probably isn't going to be appropriate during that job interview. Helping them are building that awareness so they know to make sure that they are alert and off their phone during that job interview, and not just during that job interview, from the moment they walk in the door. Again, some of this might seem like skills that you might think everybody knows, but I promise you, this is not the case. So we definitely try to work with our clients and help them realize that, that job interview is starting sometimes in the parking lot, but at least when you walk in that door. And some employers will even say that they'll watch before the interview to see if folks are on their phone. And if they're on their phone a lot before that interview, that is a mark against them because they're worried that they're going to be on their phone during the workplace. So again, part of that presentation of self is looking alert and looking like you want to be there and are motivated to be there. We like to remind our clients not to go alone, or to make sure that they go alone, not to have somebody go with them to the interview. This is a challenge that we've seen sometimes with some of our clients, especially if they've relied on some transportation to take them there. Sometimes that person will want to come into them, but that's really not the best foot for that job interview. And then to be on time. We encourage them also to make sure they bring a copy of the resume, and if they have references, they can bring a list of references. We encourage them to know their qualifications, so be prepared. We work with them to prepare a little bit of a description of why they think they're a good candidate for this job. And part of that is also knowing about the company. You can't go in and say you don't know anything about that company. That's not going to get you that step up in that interview. So being prepared, and the more prepared you are, the more you're going to be alleviating those employers' fears, right? And a couple things we do try to talk to them about. We try to make sure that our clients are prepared to not go in and to talk in a way where they're trying to look for sympathy. Studies show that is not successful. Hiring managers, if somebody comes in and they're like looking for sympathy during that interview, that's a red flag for hiring managers. So avoid that, because you really want to stay positive during the interview. And if you're looking for sympathy, then you're not keeping that interview positive. And then we also work with them to practice their reentry pitch. And we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about that. So some of this information about the reentry pitch, we've compiled this after doing a lot of research. I mean, reviewing best practices, reviewing HR and employment journals, and then reviewing some of the criminology journals as well. And what we have found is that employers are really looking for, during the interview, what we call the 3 R's when they're interviewing somebody who's justice impacted. They want to hear that person note responsibility, they want to hear regret, and they want to hear redemption. So those 3 R's are 3 important parts that a justice impacted person should plan into their script when they talk about their prior conviction. Now, not all interviews will ask folks about their prior conviction, but if they are going to be asked, we want them to be prepared, because if they're not prepared, they're more likely to freeze or say something that maybe doesn't put them in the best light or doesn't alleviate those employers' fears. And our goal is to help alleviate those employers' fears during that interview. We also talk to our clients about signaling and ways to signal to the employer about their change or their positive transformation. So this includes discussing training, discussing education or counseling that they've been a part of, things that demonstrate their employability and their positive transformation. And the last part of the slide just kind of reviews those employee concern or employer fears and concerns. So just as a reminder, employers fear that justice impacted folks will need help integrating into society, that they're not work ready, that they lack soft skills, lack trustworthiness, have a high risk cost or a high fear, or that they fear violence. These are all fears that we can address during that reentry pitch moment. So the reentry pitch, I keep saying this, what do I mean? Well, the reentry pitch, this is what you say when during the interview you're asked, have you ever been convicted of a crime? Tell me about it. We work with our clients before they go out onto interviews to talk about this ahead of time, to be prepared. That way they're not frozen during that interview, and that way they can keep the message positive. So up here we have an example of a poor answer. Well, I was using drugs and I was not thinking right. My boyfriend was selling drugs and asked me to hold some. The police said I was part of his conspiracy, but I didn't do anything except trust the wrong person. They gave me 2 years. So this is not a really good answer, right? It doesn't note responsibility, doesn't note regret, and it definitely doesn't talk about redemption or positive transformation, right? So this isn't a response that is going to leave the employer's fears alleviated. So let's look at a better example, one that does all of these things. Well, I'm glad you asked me, because I want you to feel comfortable hiring me. I want to assure you that it had nothing to do with my previous employment. In my past, I was involved with drugs. I made some poor decisions, and as a result was convicted of distribution of a controlled substance. While incarcerated, I took the opportunity to enroll in a drug treatment program. I took classes and maintained employment. I have 2 years of experience in food service, and I want to stay in the industry and learn as much as possible. So with this answer, first of all, it's addressing the concerns of the employer, right? It really starts with the great sentence. You know, I'm glad you asked me. I want you to feel comfortable hiring me. You're showing early on you have these communication soft skills and this sense of trustworthiness. And remember, one of the aspects or one of the factors that played a role when an employer hires somebody with the justice impact, you know, with a prior conviction, is that is their sincerity and transparency when talking about their criminal conviction. So this is really a great start to that. This response also stays positive throughout the whole thing. This is really important. We want to make sure that when the employer is thinking back about this conversation, they've got more positive things to think about than negative things to think about, and it's ending strong. It takes responsibility. There's a note of regret in there, and it demonstrates an effort of redemption and coming back to that person's qualifications. And I think that's actually really important too. Ending strong and positive, coming back to one's qualifications. If we look at that previous example, you know, the ending is they gave me 2 years. You don't want your employer or the person doing that interview walking away from that with the last sentence in their head being, they did 2 years in prison. It's much better for them to walk away thinking, oh, this person wants to stay in the industry and they already have this experience. That's a much more, you know, a positive idea for them to walk away and to associate with our client or with a justice impacted person than that prior answer. So we really spend a lot of time working on this reentry pitch. We review those 3 R's, the responsibility, regret, redemption, and we even have our clients draft out what they might say and practice it with us ahead of time. Sometimes we do that work and they're not asked about it, but there's been plenty of times where we've done it and they have been asked about it, and it's helped them in that moment because they've known what they want to say, and they know how to present themselves in a positive way. Lastly, 2 other things we want to share with you that can help working with justice impacted people be successful in the interview. And these are 2 different programs that we have offered in the state of Ohio that they can talk about during the interview to leverage their appeal with their employer. One is the federal bonding program, which provides a bond worth $5,000 that can last for 6 months. And the other is the federal work opportunity tax credit, which provides federal income tax credits when hiring individuals with certain barriers to employment, including being justice impacted. So these are 2 different programs that we have in the state that folks can present to their employer during the job interview to further show their trustworthiness. They can say, hey, if you have additional concerns, I can obtain a federal bonding insurance which would protect you as my employer. Are you familiar with this program? And this can give them that leg up. And in fact, Mary has some experience using the federal bonding program to her success with employment. So I'm going to pass it back to Mary so she can talk a little more about her experience.
Okay, so you guys, I had an opportunity to work for Procter & Gamble. I could not believe it. I was chose to come in and interview with P&G. So I knew my record was not something that I felt P&G would accept. Even though I had all the qualifications, I met every qualification it was to meet to be able to be an employer of Procter & Gamble. My criminal background just really hindered me from actually being considered. So when I sat down with the HR director, I was able to explain to her about the federal bonding program and how that, just say that I do something that's totally not what I'm supposed to do, and it cost them some money, or it stood in the way. I lost them some money. They had this blanket, the security blanket of $5,000 to be able to be reimbursed back to them in efforts of hiring me. And I was just so happened to do something that I shouldn't do when I was employed by them. And because of the fact that they were in agreement with the federal bonding program, they had looked it up, they had did the steps, realized it wasn't going to be a long, hard process to sign me up or to sign the company up and employ me under that federal bonding program. P&G hired me under the federal bonding program. Back to you, Ms. Wagner.
Thank you so much, Mary, for sharing your experience. I really appreciate it. All right, so we're really at the end of our presentation today. We took some time and we looked at some of those internal and external barriers faced by folks looking for employment. We talked about some employers' fears, and in what cases are employers willing to hire folks that are justice impacted. And then we shared some of the tools that we use to help equip our clients to be empowered during that interview process, right? And we spent a lot of time talking about the redemption narrative as a piece of that, as well as just some other skills that we like to talk about with our clients to help them be successful. We'd like to open up now for any questions, if folks have any questions.
Yes, I have a question. Hi, my name is Majed Muhammad, and I kind of jumped on a little late, right? So you may have already addressed this, but I work with justice involved individuals, and I've seen in many instances where employers would deal with a third party for doing background checks. Normally when I advocate for justice involved individuals, I try to find out beforehand what's their criteria or standards for hiring justice involved. But I run across a lot of employers who say, well, we don't deal with that. A third party deals with that. And then they can't really give me any guidelines or standards, who they'll accept, who they won't accept. And I just wanted to know if you've had any experience or you got any advice for situations like that.
Yeah, I'll agree. We've run into that also. Even folks who say they're second chance employers still tend to work on a case by case basis. So that's something that we like to make sure we're telling our clients ahead of time. You know, this employer has hired folks with criminal histories in the past, but keep in mind, they're specific on which criminal histories they will hire and which ones they won't hire. So we definitely like to make sure we're explaining to our clients ahead of time so they don't get discouraged. Because it can be challenging, right? Like if you're going to work at a warehouse, we have clients who have violent charges around like assault who can work at a warehouse but have misdemeanors around theft that cannot work at that warehouse, right? So oftentimes the level of the charge might not even play a role. It's in getting that job. So one of the things that we try to do to help with this, we do try to talk to HR professionals, but we run into that too. We find that they don't want to give you anything concrete. And that makes sense from their perspective because they don't want to be held liable for anything either. So what we try to do is we do our own internal tracking. When we have somebody and we find that they have success getting a job somewhere, we make a note, hire somebody that has DV. This company will hire folks that have DV. This company will not hire folks with theft. And we try to keep that in our internal records and use that when we're trying to then help connect clients with potential employers. But you're right, it's not a perfect system. And I really do wish we could get employers just to give us a list of like this, yes, this, no. It would definitely make life easier.
Hi, Dr. Wagner. This is Ernest. That was a great question too, Brother Muhammad. I don't see any questions. I'm kind of monitoring the chat, but I did kind of have one on my own. Speaking of which, just trying to keep this on theme, if you will, Dr. Wagner, address like hope, help, and healing for employers that are reluctant to hire certain types of justice impacted individuals. What would your pitch be to them in terms of reasons why? Now, we know with the federal bonding program and understanding they can get a percentage off the wages for up to 6 months or a certain time frame, understanding those benefits, the monetary benefits, are there any other factors that could play a part in that pitch, and what would it sound like?
Yeah, so actually there are some studies out there that show, especially for folks, justice impacted folks, especially that are coming out of prison, oftentimes when they get connected to an employer, they're very grateful for that. And they have a strong sense of loyalty to that employer. And that loyalty, means coming to work every day and being really engaged in that work. And so there are several studies that show this already. So that is one of the things I like to point out to the HR professionals when I'm talking to them. Like you can have a staff full of very loyal employees, who are dedicated because you gave them that chance when they felt like no one else would. So I would say that is an important pitch or important part of that, as well as the federal bonding program, the work opportunity tax credit as well.
Okay, thank you so much. And we had actually Dr. Hinton was requesting if you could put your contact information as well in the chat.
In the chat? Sure,
Yes,
no problem. Well, chat is being a little bit weird, but I'm going to work on it.
You tell me about it. I'm not a tech person. And while we're doing that and awaiting, Dr. Wagner, if I can just take a second, from my experience in working not only on both sides of this reentry thing, have my personal and professional, I've recognized, I just wanted to add in there, and I thank Mary for being so detailed and sharing her fears in this whole process with CQEs. That was wonderful, that presentation. But what I'm getting is a lot of men and women that are returning home maybe going to another area. And although they may have a resume that they've received from the Ohio Means Jobs while they were incarcerated or after incarceration, they can have the close from Close That Work or another faith-based organization that help them with interview close, and they have the answers. They have that pitch that you talked about, and they know how to produce that. What would also be beneficial towards helping them towards those fears of, well, your record is this, you've just got out, you're fresh out, maybe 9, 10 months, or even a year. What can we do to strengthen that? Because a lot of people come to me in the Office of Reentry and say, Ernest, I'm scared. I didn't apply because, why would I? I'm fresh out. I've only been out for 6 months to a year, and I try to encourage them, like, don't be dismayed about time. The person you are now is the person that's moving forward. Let's focus on that, what you've accomplished and what you've learned. And I like how you said also, Dr. Wagner, about this is actually a opportunity to actually share who you are now. Is that kind of how you approach the situation as well?
Yes, that is how I approach it. Yes, I agree. Sorry, I missed some of the beginning of your question because I was putting in my contact information into the chat. Ernest, were you talking specifically more about the CQE process or just generally?
No, those that may have accomplished the CQE, they've earned that. They have a nice prevalent resume. They have some skills that they've learned, soft skills, or maybe some hard skills, trade skills from Ohio Means Jobs or other organizations. Let's say they have all of that, but yet that fear of, I've only been home for 10 months or maybe a year. What I'm wanting to find new ways or see if you have any to kind of encourage them on overcoming those kind of obstacles and fears.
Yeah, so I think a big part of that is helping them see their own progress. A lot of times folks are resistant to see how much growth they've had. And I think that's often because they feel bad about their prior actions and behaviors. So they feel like the big steps of growth they have aren't really that big. But they are big. So, helping them, empowering them means also help building their esteem, helping them see their value. And you help them see their value by showing value in them, by showing your support in them, and then finding other opportunities to help them be successful as well. So I think that's an important part of that conversation. This can look a little different for different clients. Sometimes with clients, I'll have them bring in all their certificates and we'll look at them together and we'll talk about them like, look, you did this and you did this and you did this. Talk about all of these things and giving them that. I don't want to say permission, but oftentimes it feels like almost giving them permission to be proud of themselves and to be able to talk about themselves in a positive way. A lot of times clients, especially if they've been justice impacted for a long time or have long histories in the criminal justice system, or even had issues in school where they were in trouble a lot during school, they don't feel confident about talking about their success. In fact, a lot of people don't feel confident talking about their success. So really empowering them to see their personal growth and working with them and helping them build that language to talk about their growth is going to be a really important tool to help them move forward.
Okay, it looks like Cheyenne has a question.
Oh, sorry, camera's being weird. I apologize. Good morning, everybody. So I am the reentry coordinator with Ohio Guidestone, and most of the population that I work with are youth. And I noticed majority of my clients that are coming out of the correctional facilities are right around that 17 to 18 age range. So they're in that nice little bubble between minor and adult. Is there any advice that you would give directly for youth when it comes to their jobs and their pasts?
Yeah,
Does that
so
make sense?
one of the things I would recommend is really exploring that career pathway with them. And with youth, you're actually at a better advantage. Talking about career pathways with folks who are 45 years old, it's hard. Sometimes they roll their eyes, they don't want to engage in that conversation. But we do our best to pull them along. But youth, other youth are thinking about their career pathway. So that's actually an advantage, right? Because you can rely on just the cultural norm of that age group, thinking about what they want from their future. And then, of course, I would say, trying to connect them with education opportunities. And this can be really hard if they're just as impacted at a young age. Then they've probably had some trouble in school already. That's one of the things that we tend to see, right? So finding ways for them to continue to build their knowledge, where they're empowered through that, I think is really key. So maybe that's the traditional high school that they went to, or maybe it's finding an alternative high school. Maybe it's getting them connected to like a school that does trade, like a trade program within that school. But really starting to build a connection for them around education, I think is just really key. Because as we know, if you don't have a high school diploma, your income is significantly lower as you get older compared to folks who do have a high school diploma, right? So getting kids to value education and complete that education, I would say, is really a key first step. And then finding a way that they'll want to do it, right? So that's why you have to engage that career pathway.
Great question. Thanks, Cheyenne. And Dr. Brooke, it looks like we have about 3 minutes left, but I did want a safe space. It looked like someone would really love to hear Mary's answer to that question about overcoming those obstacles and fears, being fresh out. So I wanted to give Mary a chance to respond to that, and also remind our participants, those who engaged as well, to please kind of look at where you're going to shift in your next session once we end here. Thanks.
I noticed that question, and my thoughts to that is because I found myself in those situations several times, even all the way down to the aspect of the interview with Procter and Gamble. I knew HR knew that I had the background. I knew that my background was the kind of background that will stand in the way of getting employed in a lot of industries. And that's because my background had a lot of thefts on it. And most people turn down or frown upon theft-related charges. And that's only because they don't know if you're going to steal from them, which is very understandable. Regardless of me being able to prove that I have the qualifications, my black and white on paper still said that this person is going to rob you blind if they have an opportunity. So I always went to an interview with that in the back of my head. But I found that the less I watered that seed to not let it grow, the better my confidence stood when I sat in front of that interviewer and I was able to sell myself productively, not to do it to try to scheme them out of something, but to actually gain their trust and to get them to understand that I'm not just that black and white on that piece of paper that says that this person has done this and done that. That I am the person that's in front of you with all these wonderful qualifications, and that I can be the greatest asset to your company if you allow me the opportunity to show you that I will be a wonderful asset versus a liability if you were to hire me. And the main thing was that I did it with confidence, and I did it without watering that negative seed to make me feel weary when I did sit down before those individuals. So that's the best advice that I could possibly give, is just don't water those seeds no matter what, and to stand confident that you have become a better person, regardless of what that black and white said.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And it looks like we've come to our end here for this session. And Dr. Brooke Wagner, I want to thank you. And Mary, I want to thank you. I want to thank all of the participants and those who engaged and asked questions. Cheyenne, Brother Muhammad, thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been very fruitful. And I know I took away a lot. And I've been working in this field for quite a while. So I thank you so much. It was very useful. I don't know, Dr. Wagner, if you had any final words before we shift over and go. We all head to our next session. I know you put your information in the chat. So Dr. Wagner is available, her email address and her information. And I just want to thank you all again. And let's look forward to learning together and growing together. Have a great afternoon. Thank you all.